Chapter 1. Zara. The air tasted like burnt sugar and panic. I didn't run like a woman being chased. I ran like a stray bullet. Pure, undirected momentum. Every footfall on the polished marble floor of Il Santo felt deafening, a drumbeat counting down to my recapture. Leo, his name was a razor wire around my throat. He wasn't just my ex. He was an eviction notice on my soul, and he was closing in. His voice a low, possessive snarl echoing from the main dining room. "Find a bolt hole. Now." My gaze snagged on a single, unmarked mahogany door, tucked discreetly between the wine cellar entrance and the maitre d's station. A private dining room. I didn't stop to think. I simply twisted the heavy brass handle, slipped inside, and silently locked the bolt. The room was cool, quiet, and impossibly opulent, smelling of expensive leather and something faintly metallic, like polished silver and, oddly, gun oil. 3 large dark figures were already seated at a massive oval table in the center, their posture radiating authority and menace. They weren't dining. They were conducting a serious meeting. The table was covered in glossy blueprints and leather-bound ledgers, not plates. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Wrong room, wrong place, wrong men. My eyes fell on the space beneath the table. The tablecloth was heavy, floor-length velvet, pooling slightly on the Persian rug. It was a perfect, dark shield, a desperate luxury. I slid the heavy wooden chair back, dropped to my hands and knees, and scrambled into the small, dusty cavern beneath the table. I curled myself into a miserable, shaking ball, pulling the heavy fabric tight around my ankles, praying my black dress blended into the shadows. The men's deep, rumbling conversation, a cold discussion of percentages and territory, resumed instantly, as if the door hadn't opened. I squeezed my eyes shut, focusing on the sounds of the expensive leather shoes inches from my head. I could almost feel the power emanating from the man sitting directly across from me. He had the deepest voice. It wasn't loud, but it had the weight of granite. "The deal is clean. Santino is an accountant, not a soldier. We take the docks. He gets his percentage. No mess." My breath hitched. The docks. This wasn't a business meeting. This was a syndicate meeting. I was hiding under the table of the city's most untouchable, invisible monster. Matteo, the Saint Vitale. The name I had only ever heard whispered in hushed, terrified tones. He was known for being brutally efficient, cold, and utterly silent. No mess. Just then my pocket vibrated. My phone. It was muted. But in the silence of that tense, high-stakes room, the subtle zzz, zzz, zzz was an air horn. It sounded again. And again. Leo was calling. The conversation above me ceased. Instantly. Completely. The silence was the most terrifying sound in the world. It was heavy, judgmental, and final. I didn't breathe. I didn't dare touch my phone to silence it. The granite voice, Matteo's, spoke, low and deadly. It was directed not at the men, but down, right at my ear. "The shoes are Jimmy Choo, darling. Too expensive for a cleaning crew." A shadow fell over me as the man shifted in his seat. The velvet tablecloth was flicked up with a single sharp motion. My eyes shot up, meeting a pair of glacial, intelligent, and utterly unreadable dark eyes. Matteo Vitale. His face was sharp, devastatingly handsome, and utterly devoid of warmth. His tailored charcoal suit made him look less like a gangster, and more like a Greek statue carved from obsidian. His hand, large, powerful, and impeccably clean, rested casually on his knee, mere inches from my face. "You have 10 seconds to explain what you are doing under my table, or I will assume you are a very misplaced assassin and my men will act accordingly." The threat wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was a guarantee. The two men beside him had already placed their hands on their holsters. The metallic sound of steel against leather was chillingly quiet. I scrambled back slightly, hitting the sturdy wood of the table leg. My voice was a terrified, reedy whisper. I'm not an assassin. I'm just running. Please, he's outside. He? Matteo's eyes narrowed, sweeping over my terrified face, missing nothing. He didn't look angry. He looked inconvenienced. Leo, my ex, he's dangerous. He's been looking for me for a week, and he just cornered me in the lobby. He's violent, and he thinks he owns me. My 10 seconds were up. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable violence, the cold dismissal. Instead, a low, genuinely amused sound rumbled in his chest. A laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Thinks he owns you. Under my table? He leaned down slightly, bringing his expensive cologne, a sophisticated mix of cypress and cold leather, closer. You have exquisite taste in hiding spots, signorina. Stay put. You're interrupting a $10 million discussion, and I don't appreciate poor etiquette. He dropped the tablecloth, allowing the velvet to fall back into place, sealing me in. Vincenzo, Matteo said, his voice instantly back to the cold business tone. Send 2 men to the front. There's a stray dog in the lobby looking for his leash. Put him on a flight out of the city, or better yet, make sure he thinks the city air is permanently toxic. No mess. Now back to Santino's arrangement. I stayed huddled under the table, the tremors starting to subside as the full, terrifying realization of what I'd done and who had just saved me sank in. I was safe from Leo, but I was now the property of a man who dealt in no mess and permanent toxicity. The danger wasn't gone. It had simply gotten a lot more expensive and 100 times deadlier.
Chapter 2. Matteo. I had 2 rules for my private meetings. They were simple, rigid, and universally respected. Rule 1, nobody interrupts. Rule 2, absolute silence unless you have something worth saying. The shuddering vibration coming from beneath my custom-made Italian walnut table broke both rules simultaneously, and my entire focus shattered. The drone of Vincenzo detailing the financial structuring of the Santino deal, a complex $10 million arrangement to secure the city's shipping arteries, vanished. All I heard was the high-pitched, insistent zzzzzin of a cheap, mass-market phone. Annoyance was too mild a word. It was a cold, pure rage that settled behind my sternum. Someone had breached my sanctum, and they were hiding. The shoes are Jimmy Choo, darling. Too expensive for a cleaning crew. The words were spoken for the benefit of my men, a cold amusement to mask the lethal certainty of my intent. I needed a clear line of sight, an inventory of the threat. I lifted the tablecloth. What I found was not a hardened assassin, not a wire, and not a rival's spy. It was a woman. She was a breathtaking chaos of silk, dark hair, and raw, unrestrained terror. Her eyes, wide and green, were stunningly expressive, flicking from fear to defiance in the space of a heartbeat. She was huddled like a frightened animal, yet beneath the fear, there was an unmistakable spark of intelligence, a furious refusal to submit. A dangerous combination. You have 10 seconds to explain what you are doing under my table, or I will assume you are a very misplaced assassin and my men will act accordingly. I watched her face as she spoke, processing her breathless explanation about Leo and running. The 10 seconds were a formality. My mind had already run its own diagnostic. The fear was genuine. The terror in her eyes was not feigned, and the sheer desperation that would drive a woman to hide beneath the table of the city's most feared man spoke volumes about the threat she faced. Leo, whoever he was, must be a monster. Thinks he owns you? Under my table? The possessiveness in my own tone surprised me. It was instinctual. Everything within this room, within my orbit, belonged to me. The very idea that some petty thug thought he had claim over something that had sought refuge in my sanctuary was an offense. She was a distraction, an illogical variable, but I found myself unwilling to let the threat outside touch her. She was beautiful, yes, but beauty was common. What was uncommon was the fire I saw behind the fear, the kind of untamed spirit I rarely encountered in this controlled world. I dropped the cloth, not to dismiss her, but to shield her for the time being. "Vincenzo," I commanded, my focus already shifting. "Send 2 men to the front. There's a stray dog in the lobby looking for his leash. Put him on a flight out of the city, or better yet, make sure he thinks the city air is permanently toxic. No mess." Now, back to Santino's arrangement. The discussion resumed, but the efficiency was gone. My mind was now running 2 simultaneous calculations. The first was Santino's ledger. The second was the soft, feminine curve of the problem beneath my feet. The meeting dragged on for 10 torturous minutes. Every rustle of the velvet cloth was a siren. I spoke clearly, cutting the discussion short, demanding concise answers, my impatience a cold spike in the room. "Enough!" I finally snapped. "The terms stand." Enzo, finalize the transfer details. Marco, ensure the paperwork is flawless. The men rose, respectful, yet wary of the unusual tension. As they cleared the blueprints, I gestured to the table. "You, come out now, before I decide to burn this distraction." The cloth was pushed aside, and she emerged, Zara, as I now knew her name was. She rose slowly, all long, slender limbs and defiant posture, despite the fresh trails of fear still etched around her eyes. She brushed the dust from her silk dress, her movements unnecessarily elegant. "Your ex has been dealt with," I stated, leaning back in my chair, crossing my legs. "He won't bother you tonight. He won't bother you tomorrow. But eventually, a dog with a taste for blood returns to the hunt. You're a risk, a liability. You sought refuge here, which means you dragged my problem into my house." She met my gaze, her chin lifting. "I'm sorry for the interruption, Mr. Vitale." "Thank you. I'll leave now. I won't tell anyone what I saw or what I heard." The attempt at quiet, dignified retreat was almost charming. Almost. "You'll leave when I dismiss you, signorina, and you heard the price of the docks. You heard the name Santino. You have compromised my security. You know too much about me, and far too little about the kind of men who protect me. Letting you walk out that door is professional suicide. And I, unlike your ex, am meticulous about self-preservation." She paled, taking a small, instinctive step back. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not a criminal. I'm a marketing manager. I have a job. I just need to get back home." I offered her a cold, predatory smile. "That job and that home are now compromised. Leo knows you ran to Il Santo. He will assume you have allies now. He's going to wait, and he's going to strike when you're alone. Your safety net is shredded." I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. I walked around the table slowly, closing the distance until I loomed over her. The contrast between my tailored power and her exposed vulnerability was intoxicating. "I offer you an alternative, a guarantee." I stopped right in front of her. The tension between us was thick, electric, no longer just fear, but a tangible sexual friction. It was the scent of danger and the promise of a controlled flame. You stay close, very close. You don't leave my sight for the foreseeable future. You will be my personal assistant, my PA. I emphasize the role with dry scorn. You'll handle my legitimate paperwork, my scheduling, and my public relations. You're smart. You have backbone. I need a face that suggests respectability and a brain that can keep up. In exchange, I offer you my protection. Absolute, irrevocable. You become my territory, and I am very, very good at defending my property. She stared up at me, those green eyes blazing. You want to put me in another cage? Just a gold-plated one. It's a fortress, not a cage, Zara, I corrected, my voice dropping to a low purr. And unlike your ex, I don't demand obedience through fear. I demand excellence through respect. You work for me, you earn my trust, and you are untouchable. You walk out that door, I gestured toward the room's entrance, and the dog gets his leash back. You choose. She hesitated, her gaze flicking between my eyes and my hand, which was now resting on the edge of the table not far from hers. She was weighing the risks, the known monster outside versus the unknown monster standing before her. What if I say no? She challenged, her voice trembling slightly, but holding firm. The defiance was a powerful draw. Then I am genuinely sorry, I murmured, leaning closer until only a breath separated us. Because then I would have to consider you a loose end. And I detest loose ends. I would still neutralize Leo because he now links back to me, but you would lose the security of being under my roof. You would be a fugitive forever. It wasn't a threat of violence from me, but a chilling assurance of how precarious her life truly was outside my protection. I gave her no more time to argue, no time for moral objection. Your choice is made. We start tomorrow. Enzo will escort you to a new residence. It's secure. Be ready at 8 a.m. If you are late, I will assume you changed your mind, and I will treat you as a liability. I turned, dismissing her with the cold finality of a closing bank vault. Welcome to the firm, Miss Zara. I walked to the sideboard, poured myself a dark amber liquid, a necessary anchor, and glanced back. She was still standing there, absorbing the shock, the terror, and the strange, undeniable heat that now sparked between us. She was a liability, yes, but a beautiful one I was already intensely curious to examine up close. The world of finance had just gotten a lot more interesting.
Chapter 3. Zara. The apartment was not a home. It was a silent, sprawling monument to sterile wealth. Located on the 50th floor of a downtown skyscraper, it offered a panoramic view of the city. A city I was now officially forbidden to walk in alone. My new residence, as Matteo had called it, was more like a gilded waiting room, complete with a perpetually stony-faced driver, Enzo, who appeared precisely at 7:55 a.m. I chose a charcoal pencil skirt and a crisp white blouse. Not just because it was professional, but because I needed the armor. I needed to project competency, not fear. I was not a stray dog he'd decided to keep. I was an employee, even if the terms of my employment were based on coercion and the suppression of a violent ex. The drive to the real office, a nondescript but towering glass building, was silent. Enzo handed me a keycard labeled Level 32. Private access only. Stepping off the elevator, the atmosphere changed entirely. This wasn't the opulence of the restaurant. This was the quiet, controlled hum of a financial fortress. The waiting area was sparse, futuristic, and overseen by two intimidating men in perfectly tailored suits, who looked less like security and more like decommissioned Navy SEALs. I was shown into Matteo's direct office suite. It wasn't an office. It was a minimalist cathedral of power. One wall was floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the city. The other three were pristine white marble. Matteo was already seated behind a crescent-shaped desk of dark granite, phone pressed to his ear, his back to the cityscape. He was already working, utterly absorbed. His presence was a gravitational pull. Even from across the room, the raw, cold intensity he exuded was palpable. He wore a crisp, light blue shirt today, the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and, I couldn't help but notice, a faint, silver scar near his elbow. The sight felt intensely personal, a small vulnerability in a man who presented as invincible. He ended his call with a terse, final statement that sounded like a verdict, then looked up. His eyes, the color of the deepest espresso, swept over me in a single, dismissive professional assessment. You're on time. Good, reliability is mandatory. Sit. I took the seat opposite him. My laptop, which Enzo had retrieved from my old apartment, was set on the desk, looking pitifully inadequate next to his 3 large screens displaying complex stock market charts. Your duties, Miss Zara, are simple. You will handle all legitimate correspondence. That includes drafting letters to potential investors, organizing my calendar, which requires absolute discretion, and compiling summaries of market reports. I need your mind, not your legs. You will not be fetching coffee unless I explicitly ask for it as a sign of disrespect. His dry humor was a calculated jab. He was testing me, pushing the boundary between boss and captor. Understood, Mr. Vitale. And my security? I asked, meeting his gaze directly. Absolute, he confirmed, his voice dangerously low. A rival crew will view your proximity to me as a potential weakness. My enemies now have a new target. Therefore, you are guarded, 24 hours a day. Think of it as a protective detail, not a house arrest. But make no mistake, if you try to leave my sight without permission, the protection ceases, and my men will not hesitate to bring you back. The tension thickened, but the underlying threat solidified the trade. My freedom for my life. He pushed a thick, leather-bound folder across the desk. Start with this. It's a formal proposal for the acquisition of the Marisol Group. I need you to proofread it. Find any weaknesses in the language, any place where we sound less than entirely in control. I opened the document. It was densely written, heavy on legal terminology, and clearly drafted by a sharp but arrogant lawyer. I pulled my pad and pen toward me and began to work, my focus immediately diving into the text, a familiar comfort zone. For the next hour, the only sound was the scratching of my pen and the low, incessant tapping of Matteo's fingers on his granite desk as he worked on his screens. I found the flaw on page 8. A crucial section discussing asset restructuring was awkwardly phrased, using a double negative that, while legally sound, made the text unnecessarily convoluted and sounded deeply defensive. It made the entire paragraph sound like they were trying to hide something. I circled the sentence and wrote the correction in the margin. Replace with, "We shall restructure the dormant assets immediately upon acquisition to maximize market potential." Simple, direct, powerful. I finished the report, placed the pen down, and slid the folder back to him. He picked it up without looking at me, his eyes still on his screens, but his hand went directly to the section I'd edited. He read my note, and his tapping fingers stopped. He looked up slowly, his expression unreadable, the first spark of true, sharp banter ignited. To maximize market potential, stronger, clearer, but you left this word here, Miss Zara. He pointed to a clause on page 2, a long, self-important sentence attempting to flatter the Marisol CEO. The lawyer had used the word, utilize. A perfectly acceptable word, Mr. Vitale, I defended, refusing to back down from the grammar war. It's pretentious, Miss Zara, It says, "Look at me. I know a big word. Use is sufficient. Don't muddy the water with 3 syllables when one will do, especially not when demanding $500 million. I agree with the principle, Mr. Vitale, I countered, feeling a sudden, reckless surge of excitement at sparring with him. However, you have a recurring problem with your email communications, if I may be so bold as to point it out. His eyebrow arched, a signal of genuine intrigue and annoyance. My emails are efficient. What is the problem? The problem, I said, leaning slightly forward, meeting his gaze with a challenge, is that in every single correspondence I reviewed last night, you used the phrase, irregardless of the current fiscal trajectory. Twice. It's not a word. The word is regardless. Irregardless is redundant and tells your counterpart you are poorly educated. The silence that followed was intense. One of his men, standing near the door, actually coughed. This was more dangerous than correcting a legal document. I had attacked his basic competence. For a terrifying moment, I thought he was going to fire me. Or worse. But then, a slow, grudging smile, devoid of warmth but packed with sharp amusement, finally touched his lips. A linguistic critique from under my own table. I should have known the price of rescue was eternal correction. He paused, his dark eyes scrutinizing my face. I detest being wrong, Miss Zara, but I detest incompetence more. You will henceforth draft all external communications. And if I ever see that ridiculous word in my inbox again, regardless of who writes it, I will assume you failed to educate your employer. The tension in the room was electric, the initial fear giving way to a volatile mix of intellectual respect and overwhelming sexual awareness. The way he leaned back, the possessive weight of his gaze, the sheer proximity of his power. It was suffocating and exhilarating all at once. He was annoyed, but undeniably impressed. The banter wasn't just sharp, it was a flirtation, a subtle challenge to his authority that he was surprisingly enjoying. He stood, signaling the end of the first session. He was physically imposing, easily 6.5 feet of pure, restrained strength. "Lunch," he announced, "and you're coming with me. We need to establish your presence in my world, and I need to know precisely how capable you are when the pressure isn't academic." He picked up his tailored blazer and shrugged it on, transforming from powerful businessman to lethal operative in a single fluid movement. He didn't ask if I was ready. He simply waited by the door, his eyes demanding my compliance, his silent intensity promising both danger and an irresistible, forbidden safety.
Chapter 4. Matteo. The moment Zara stepped into my orbit, the calculus of my life shifted. It was infuriating. I deal in certainties, in leverage, in men who fear the consequences of betrayal. Zara offered only volatile variables wrapped in silk and surprising intellect. We ate lunch in a private dining room on the 30th floor, far enough from the main operation to maintain privacy, close enough to maintain control. I watched her every move. She didn't gorge herself. She sampled. She didn't stare at the cityscape. She observed the patterns of the traffic below with an analytical gaze. She was cautious, yet she didn't flinch when I casually mentioned the disappearance of her ex, Leo. "He's gone," I stated, cutting into a perfectly seared filet. "He won't be contacting you again. My men are very thorough." "Thorough how, Matteo?" she asked, using my first name without permission. But the bite in her tone wasn't challenging. It was genuinely unsettled. She hadn't seen the violence, but she felt the consequence. "Thorough enough that you won't have to worry," I replied, unwilling to grant her the specifics of the brutality required to erase a problem. That was the part of my life I kept guarded, the machinery that made the legitimate facade possible. I decided to test the boundaries of her usefulness beyond grammar correction. We have a complication with the D'Amico acquisition, I admitted, pushing a tablet toward her that displayed raw internal projections. I needed an outside perspective, someone uninvested in the internal politics. Their finance head, Rossi, is flagging the asset transfer we discussed. He's citing precedents from the 08 collapse. He's stalling, citing legitimate concerns. But I suspect he's getting nervous and looking for an exit. My men, including Vincenzo, who was present for strategic counsel, would have dismissed Rossi as weak, or worse, a traitor to be removed. But I needed to understand the fear. Zara leaned into the tablet, her brow furrowed in concentration. She didn't look at me, but the concentration radiating off her was potent. She spent 5 full minutes absorbing data, her silence intense. "Matteo," she finally began, her voice softer now, professional. "It's not the 08 collapse he's worried about. It's the language of the precedents report. Look at the footnotes on page 12. It's referencing the solvency clause under Title 4, Section C, the one that applies specifically to shell corporations operating in international waters." I stared at the screen. She was right. I hadn't looked that far into the archival weeds. I had been too focused on Rossi's current maneuvering. "He's not stalling," she continued, looking up at me, her green eyes bright with discovery. "He's signaling. He knows you're relying on a structure that will collapse if the IRS digs into the paper trail. He isn't afraid of you. He's afraid of being implicated in financial fraud when you inevitably go legitimate. He's looking for an off-ramp that saves his own skin." Vincenzo shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, she's suggesting Rossi is using the law against us." "She's suggesting Rossi is smart," I corrected sharply. My gaze locked onto Zara's. She hadn't just processed the data. She had understood the human motivation behind the legal maneuvering. That was worth more than a dozen bodyguards. "So, what is the play?" I demanded, leaning forward, my control beginning to fray not from rage, but from a sudden, unfamiliar dependency. "You don't threaten him with your usual methods," she said, looking pointedly at my suited posture, which she now associated with the violence I commanded. "You offer him a better exit strategy. You show him you know about Title 4, Section C, and you offer to draft the documentation that cleanses his participation in the current framework before the acquisition is finalized. You give him a lifeline, and you use the clean documentation to seal the deal on your terms." It was elegant. It was clean. It bypassed confrontation and utilized intelligence. It was exactly how I wanted to run this entire operation one day. The realization of how deeply I was already relying on her, not just for proofreading, but for strategic insight, hit me hard. This was dangerous territory. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford, yet I was actively seeking it from the woman hiding under my table 48 hours ago. I stood abruptly, signaling the end of the discussion. "Vincenzo, prepare a revised counteroffer for Rossi based on Zara's parameters. Draft the protective documents immediately." "Matteo," Zara started, perhaps sensing the sudden shift in my mood. I rounded the granite desk, moving with predatory speed. I didn't intend to touch her, but the narrow confines of the space forced proximity. I stopped just short of crowding her, but close enough that the subtle, floral scent she wore, something light, definitely not expensive, was all I could smell. "You've just saved me 2 weeks of back and forth, Zara, and potentially millions in regulatory headaches." My intention was only to state the fact, but as I spoke, I gestured sharply toward the skyline. My hand grazed her upper arm, just below the crisp white cuff of her blouse. The contact was electric, not a brush of fabric, but skin on skin. Her entire body tensed, a visible jolt passing through her. For one suspended second, all the professional boundary we had built, the PA facade, the grammar lessons, imploded. My control vanished. My gaze dropped from her eyes to her mouth, and I saw the same momentary flare of intense, undeniable desire reflected back. The air thickened, suffocating us both in a high-stakes silence that dwarfed the D'Amico acquisition. It wasn't just chemistry. It was friction born from two opposing forces being held too close for too long. I could feel the heat radiating off her skin where I had touched her. I snatched my hand back, as if burned, my jaw tight. I stepped away, putting the desk between us again, regaining my footing. "Don't confuse competence with intimacy, Zara," I ground out, my voice rougher than intended. "You are an employee. You are also under my protection. That is the extent of our relationship. Do you understand?" She swallowed hard, regaining her composure with visible effort, though her cheeks were flushed. "Perfectly, Mr. Vitale." Efficient, clear, no muddy language. The lie was obvious in the tremor of her voice, but I let it pass. I had pushed too far, too fast. I had to reassert the structure. I had to ensure she knew the stakes of that look. Good. Now, tomorrow, I have a necessary interaction with Cassano, the idiot who thinks he can operate in my district. You will attend as my executive assistant. Dress appropriately. And Zara. I paused at the door, forcing myself to turn back one last time. If Cassano disrespects you, you look at me. You do not engage. You do not react. You let me handle it. Because when I handle things, there is often a mess. I left before she could reply. The image of her flushed face and the startlingly warm imprint of her arm burned into my senses. I needed to eliminate Cassano quickly, not just because he was encroaching on my territory, but because he represented the raw, uncontrolled chaos that I instinctively knew would be the death of Zara, and perhaps the ruin of my newfound, dangerous focus.
Chapter 5. Zara. The clothes Matteo's assistant had delivered were clearly meant to establish a specific status, untouchable property. The dress, a razor-sharp sheath of deep emerald silk, was conservative in cut but screamed expense and power. It felt like wearing a diamond chainmail. The dinner with Cassano was held at his territory, a dimly lit, impossibly pretentious restaurant with too many red velvet drapes. I walked in beside Matteo, feeling every eye in the room latch onto him, then slide to me. I wasn't just his PA, I was a clear statement. Matteo was a study in controlled ice. His jaw was set, his movements efficient. He offered me the chair beside him, his hand lingering briefly on the small of my back. A gesture that was purely territorial, a warning to the room that my space was his to guard. Cassano, the rival boss, was the polar opposite, loud, greasy, and aggressive. He wore his menace like a cheap suit. He talked too much, too loudly about respect and old alliances, but his eyes kept flicking to Matteo, testing the perimeter. I kept my focus on the table, compiling mental notes on the meeting's flow, remembering my role. The discussion was nominally about a shared warehousing venture, but the subtext was a hostile negotiation over territory. Then the air near the entrance shifted. A familiar, sickening mix of cheap cologne and possessive arrogance hit me before I even saw him. Leo. My hand instinctively gripped the smooth, cold tablecloth beneath the emerald silk. My breath hitched, a small, involuntary sound that was lost in the room's noise, but not to the man beside me. Matteo didn't look at me, didn't turn his head. His eyes were still fixed on Cassano, but his voice, low and deadly quiet, was directed solely at me. He's here. He is not a threat to you. Do not give him the satisfaction of your fear. Leo, surprisingly, walked straight toward our table. He wasn't alone. He had 2 heavy-set men with him, but the main factor was Cassano. Leo wasn't just a stray dog anymore. He was a mongrel on a rival's leash. Well, 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 Leo sneered, stopping just beside my chair. Look what the big bad boss found under his table. Hi, Zara. You forgot your toothbrush, and you forgot who you belong to. The shock of seeing him after Matteo's guarantee was a visceral punch. My old, toxic fear flared up, cold and paralyzing. I could feel the heat of my ex's rage, the familiar anticipation of the degradation he was about to unleash. Cassano watched the entire exchange with a smirk, clearly enjoying the chaos, the unexpected crack in Matteo's perfect control. Leo, get lost, Cassano ordered, but his tone was lazy, an invitation for more. Leo ignored him, his eyes locked on me. He reached out, his fingers aiming for my bare shoulder. My muscles locked, ready to flinch, ready to flee. Before Leo's fingers could even brush the expensive silk, Matteo moved. It wasn't a large movement. He didn't stand up. He didn't raise his voice, he simply lifted his hand, palm up, and placed it firmly on my left forearm, the one on the chair arm. It wasn't a squeeze of reassurance. It was an anchor, a statement of undeniable ownership. He applied just enough pressure to make it clear that I was immobile, yet safe. Then he turned his head slowly to Leo. His face was a masterpiece of cold, quiet control. There was no rage, no fire, only the absolute zero of a professional predator assessing inadequate prey. You were dealt with, and yet you return, Matteo stated, his voice barely above a whisper, which somehow made it terrifyingly loud. You confuse a warning with a suggestion. And you confuse this woman with a possession you ever had the right to claim. He glanced at Cassano, his eyes full of glacial contempt. Your choice of pet, Cassano, speaks volumes about your own status. Low-level muscle, looking for a woman he thinks will provide validation. Pathetic. Cassano's smile evaporated. He saw the shift. This wasn't about Leo. It was about the territory, the respect, and the woman sitting at the table. He's just an acquaintance, Vitale. No need to get personal, Cassano growled, shifting nervously. Matteo ignored him, his focus unwavering on Leo, who was visibly shaking now, not from anger, but from a sudden stark fear that outstripped his pathetic bravado. Go back to your master, Matteo instructed Leo, his tone softer, more conversational, which was the most terrifying thing of all. Tell him that I do not tolerate dirt on my furniture. Tell him the next time you approach something that belongs to me, you will not leave this room on your own 2 feet. He finally looked down at my arm, his long fingers pressing a final, firm warning into my silk-covered skin. Miss Zara is not your concern, nor is she your business. She is mine. Now, remove yourself before my patience is exhausted. Leo didn't need to be told twice. He backed away clumsily, his 2 bodyguards pulling him toward Cassano's table. Cassano shot a venomous glare at Matteo, but didn't protest the dismissal. Matteo had won the skirmish without ever raising his voice or throwing a punch. His cold, absolute defense of me was more terrifying, and in a dark, twisted way, exponentially hotter than any public display of violence could have been. I found myself staring at his hand on my arm. It was a prison, yes, but at that moment, it was the only safe space in the world. He hadn't just protected me. He had owned the moment and elevated my value in front of his rival. Matteo finally withdrew his hand, the air suddenly cold where his touch had been. He immediately returned his attention to Cassano, the business-focused mask perfectly restored. Now, Cassano, regarding the warehousing venture. I propose we acquire the entire block of properties, then lease you a smaller, clearly defined portion. It simplifies the paperwork and clearly establishes the primary holder of the asset. The meeting continued, utterly seamless. But I was changed. I had seen the cold, efficient engine of Matteo Vitale's protection. My fear was being replaced by a terrifying, burning loyalty and an awareness of the man beside me that was purely, recklessly physical. I had thought he wanted my brain. Tonight I realized he wanted my compliance, and he was willing to earn it with lethal protection. I was no longer trembling. I was burning. The threat was still there, but now I was under the shelter of the greatest threat of all.
Chapter 6. Matteo. The aftermath of the Cassano dinner left a cold, clean satisfaction in my chest. Leo was neutralized, not with a bullet, but with a statement. More importantly, the incident proved Zara's value extended beyond a sharp intellect. She was a catalyst. She brought my hidden instincts to the surface. I watched her for the rest of the evening. She was pale, but her hand never shook. She returned to her notes, correcting my grammar on the revised Cassano agreement, demanding I use must instead of should to solidify the obligation. The shift from terrified prey to meticulous professional was intoxicating. She was a woman who processed trauma by focusing on control, a trait I understood intimately. The real test came 3 days later. I had a dinner with Antonio Moretti, an old guard crime boss, one of the few men in the city whose respect I genuinely required. This wasn't a skirmish like the one with Cassano. It was a diplomatic necessity. The stakes were high, and Zara was coming as my executive strategist, not just my PA. I dressed to dominate. A custom 3-piece suit, dark enough to absorb the light. I found Zara waiting in the lobby of the apartment building, guarded by Marco. She wore a tailored black dress that reached her knees, severe and elegant. She looked like she belonged. Right beside me, perfectly complementing my power. The drive was silent until we hit Moretti's district. Moretti is an anachronism, I explained, needing to prepare her. He thinks women belong at home. He will ignore you or he will be condescending. Either way, you are there to observe, listen, and take notes. Do not engage unless directly addressed, and keep your responses brief and professional. And if he says I look pretty under his table, too? She asked, her voice low and laced with dry humor. I glanced at her, a muscle ticking in my jaw. The way she referenced our terrifying, ridiculous beginning was a strange kind of intimacy. He won't. Moretti is a relic, not a pig. But if he disrespects you, Zara, you look at me. You do not flinch, and you do not react. Do you understand? Your reaction is my signal. She nodded, the green in her eyes darkening with comprehension. I am your territory. I know the drill. The dinner was held at a prestigious social club. Moretti, a massive ancient man, greeted me with a firm, bone-crushing handshake. His eyes lingered on Zara for a second longer than was polite, assessing her like a piece of art that didn't belong in the room. The conversation revolved around property taxes, zoning laws, and the subtle power shifts in the city's construction unions. Zara was silent, focused, taking notes in a small, discreet pad. She was the perfect picture of professional neutrality. But Moretti was a master of subtle intimidation. Midway through a discussion about a key real estate development, he looked pointedly at Zara. You know, Matteo, you always had a clean palate, but bringing a skirt to a man's table, it's a dangerous tradition. Women belong in the periphery. They are too emotional, too distracting. No offense, Kara, he added, waving a dismissive hand at Zara. The temperature in the room plummeted. The silence was absolute. This was the challenge. This wasn't just about disrespecting Zara. It was about invalidating my choice, questioning my judgment, and testing the integrity of my organization. It was an intentional offense. I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I leaned back in my chair, giving Moretti the full measure of my contemptuous stare. With all respect, Antonio, I began, my voice a quiet, dangerous current against the oppressive silence. Zara is not here for decoration. She is here because she has a mind I value more than any of my senior analysts. She is here because she saw the flaw in the D'Amico financing, the flaw your people overlooked last month, causing you significant political exposure. I paused, letting the implication land heavily. She is smarter than you. She is here because in my organization, competence is the only tradition I maintain. She is an essential part of my operation. If you have an issue with her presence, you have an issue with my entire strategy, and therefore, you have an issue with me. My gaze was locked on Moretti, but I felt Zara's sharp, involuntary intake of breath beside me. Moretti blustered, a low, frustrated growl. I meant no disrespect to your judgment, Matteo. I am certain you didn't, I finished, allowing no avenue for retreat. Then let us continue the discussion with the respect my organization deserves. I didn't glance at Zara. I didn't need to. I knew she was vibrating with the force of the defense. I continued the business talk, excluding Moretti for a deliberate few sentences, focusing my words on the key points, reestablishing my absolute control. Finally, the dinner ended. Moretti was subdued, his earlier arrogance deflated. Back in the sedan, the silence was thicker than ever. I stared out the window, expecting her to start taking notes, to comment on Moretti's political vulnerability. Instead, a small, warm hand settled tentatively on my forearm, right above the sharp crease of my cuff. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was raw, laced with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. I turned my head. She was close, her emerald dress catching the streetlights, her eyes dark and dilated. The fear was gone, replaced by a blazing, dangerous admiration. "I didn't do it for your gratitude," I murmured, my voice gravelly. "I did it because you are mine to protect." When a man like Moretti tries to diminish something I claim, he diminishes my power. He was testing me. "He was insulting me," she corrected, the intensity in her gaze holding mine captive. "And you didn't just defend your power. You defended me. You validated my mind in front of a room full of misogynistic relics." She didn't withdraw her touch. Instead, she leaned in slightly, bridging the small, formal gap between us. The air in the car was suddenly too thin, too hot. Point of no return. This was not just attraction. It was a merging of needs. She needed my protection. I needed her validation of my better, legitimate future. The tension was a living thing, desperate for release. My control, the control I valued above all else, snapped. I reached out, my hand finding the soft curve of her neck, my thumb stroking the fragile skin just beneath her ear. Her eyes fluttered shut at the contact, a silent invitation. "You should be terrified of me, Zara," I breathed, my lips close to her ear, the darkness of the car a cloak for the intimacy. "I am," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I'm more terrified of being out there without you." That was the only answer I needed. I didn't kiss her gently. I claimed her. My mouth crashed down on hers. Possessive, desperate, and fierce. She responded instantly, the practiced professional facade dissolving into pure, hungry need. Her hand slid from my arm to my neck, pulling me closer, the expensive silk of her dress rumpling against my suit. This was not the sweet, hesitant kiss of a romance. It was the raw collision of two people whose entire relationship was built on high stakes and dangerous necessity. The driver, Marco, kept his eyes fixed determinedly on the road ahead. But I didn't care. In that kiss, I realized two things with terrifying clarity. First, I wasn't just attracted to her. I was addicted to the way she saw me, the legitimate man beneath the monster. Second, this woman was now a permanent fixture in my life, and anyone who tried to remove her would have to deal with the absolute worst of my violence. I pulled back slowly, my chest heaving, the metallic taste of desire sharp on my tongue. "We are entering dangerous ground, Zara," I warned her, my voice low and dark. "You know my world now. Once we cross this line, there is no going back." "I know," she murmured, her eyes dark with promise. "And I'm not running this time." I adjusted my tie, the cold mask of control slipping back into place, but the fire had been lit. The chemistry was no longer a game of grammar. It was a devastating reality.
Chapter 7. Zara. The days following that electrifying kiss in the car were a blur of heightened senses and terrifying intimacy. Our professional dynamic remained, a fragile dam holding back a raging river of unspoken desire. Our eyes met across the granite desk, and the air crackled with memory, with anticipation. Every good morning felt like a loaded question, every good night, a prolonged agony of wanting. He hadn't touched me again, not truly, but his presence was a constant, simmering heat. I understood his world now, not just intellectually, but viscerally. I saw the calculated ruthlessness behind the legitimate deals, the quiet men who moved through the offices like shadows, the undercurrent of danger that was as vital to his empire as the money. It was terrifying, yes, but also, irresistibly, safe. He was a fortress, and I was inside. My guard, a man named Angelo, was a silent sentinel who accompanied me everywhere. He was a constant, reassuring presence, blending into the background of high-end boutiques and art galleries, where Matteo insisted I maintain a public profile. The day started normally enough. Matteo had a crucial, legitimate meeting with a potential hotel chain investor. He needed me to compile a comprehensive market analysis report, a task that required deep focus and access to secure financial databases. He sent me back to my apartment, a secure sanctuary within his protected tower, with Angelo posted outside my door. I worked for hours, lost in spreadsheets and economic projections. My phone sat beside me, silent. The silence was a luxury I'd learned to cherish. I pushed the final report to Matteo's encrypted server, a small surge of accomplishment warming me. I stood to stretch, walking to the panoramic window, gazing out at the city lights beginning to prick the twilight sky. The city was a beautiful, dangerous beast, and I was, for the first time in my life, an integral part of its darker, more powerful pulse. A sudden, sharp knock at the door. My blood ran cold. Angelo never knocked like that. His presence was a subtle energy, not an aggressive demand. I froze, my hand hovering over my phone, ready to call Matteo, ready to scream for Angelo. Zara, open up! It's Angelo! There's a problem with the ventilation shaft in the hallway. We need to clear the building. His voice was muffled, strained, but it was his. The distinct gravelly tone. My heart pounded. Ventilation shaft? It sounded like a clumsy lie. But Angelo wouldn't lie to me. Would he? I hesitated, my hand still trembling over my phone. Hurry, Zara! The alarms are about to go off. The urgency in his voice was convincing. Matteo wouldn't want me to risk my safety. I rushed to the door, pulling the heavy bolts back, twisting the handle. The moment the door opened, a large, gloved hand clamped over my mouth, suffocating any cry. A heavy arm wrapped around my waist, yanking me backward into the dark, silent apartment. The man in front of me wasn't Angelo. He was a hulking brute, his face obscured by a dark mask, but his eyes were glinting with malicious triumph. Behind him, another masked figure stood over Angelo's crumpled form in the hallway, a dark stain spreading on the pristine carpet. Angelo was down. The shock was a physical blow. Matteo's absolute protection breached. A third figure stepped into the apartment, smaller but infinitely more terrifying. He pulled off his mask with a flourish, his familiar, sneering face illuminated by the city lights. Leo. Well, 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 my little bird, he purred, his eyes gleaming with psychotic glee. Thought you could fly, did you? Thought you could hide under a big bad wolf's table? You forgot the wolf has enemies, and those enemies have friends. He snapped his fingers. Get her. The boss wants a face-to-face, and he wants to send a message to the saint. The two brutes dragged me backward, binding my wrists with rough zip ties, securing my ankles. I struggled, twisting, kicking, but it was useless. They were too strong, too many. My mind raced, trying to find a way, any way, to leave a trace. My eyes swept the apartment, desperate. My laptop was still open on the desk, a page of the market analysis report visible. My phone lay beside it. Too obvious. I needed something subtle, something only Matteo would notice. As they dragged me toward the service elevator, pulling me past the living room, my gaze fixed on the antique chess set Matteo kept on a small, ornate table. He often fiddled with the pieces, rearranging them in his meticulous, strategic way. It was a detail only he truly paid attention to. With a final surge of adrenaline, I lashed out, my foot connecting with the delicate leg of the table. The chess set wobbled, then crashed to the floor, scattering the pieces. The heavy, polished marble king rolled across the carpet, coming to rest near the edge of a rug. One of the masked men kicked my leg, snarling, "Stop struggling, bitch." Leo merely smiled. Let her. She thinks she's leaving a trail. Bless her little heart, the saint will be too busy cleaning up his own mess to notice a few scattered pieces. He pulled me through the service entrance, down a set of emergency stairs, and into a waiting black van. The doors slammed shut, plunging me into a terrifying darkness. The last thing I saw before the world disappeared was the city lights shimmering in the distance, a silent promise of Matteo's rage. He'll know, I thought, a desperate, defiant whisper in the confines of my fear. He'll know about the king. He had to. He was too meticulous, too observant not to. The terror was immense, but beneath it, a strange, burning certainty. Matteo would come for me. He had to, because now this wasn't just about me escaping Leo. It was about Cassano declaring war on the man who had claimed me, and Matteo Vitale did not tolerate anyone touching his property.
Chapter 8. Matteo. The phone call from Marco, my head of security, was a cold blade through my meeting with the hotel chain CEO. The apartment has been breached, Matteo. Angelo is down. Zara is gone. The world tilted. The opulent boardroom, the smiling CEO, the $200 million deal, All of it dissolved into static. My blood ran to ice, then boiled. "What happened?" I demanded, my voice a dangerous growl, barely controlled. "They used a gas line ruse. Angelo bought her time, but he's in bad shape. They got her through the service elevator. Forensics are on site, but it looks like Cassano. His crew has been making moves." Cassano. The name tasted like ash. That incompetent pig thought he could touch what was mine? The audacity was a death sentence. I slammed my palm flat on the boardroom table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Gentlemen, this meeting is adjourned. We will reschedule." I didn't wait for a response. I walked out, Marco already waiting, grim-faced. "Where is she?" I demanded, striding through the hallway, my mind already calculating, eliminating. "No immediate trace." They disabled the city's CCTVs in that quadrant. Professional, but we found this. Marco held out a small, heavy piece of polished white marble, a chess king. My breath hitched. The blood drained from my face, my antique chess set, scattered. She knew. She knew only I would notice. She had left me a signal. My mind raced. The king. A challenge. Cassano. He was a clumsy tactician, but he knew how to hit where it hurt. He wanted to rattle me. He wanted to display his newfound strength by violating my sanctuary. Get me Enzo. Get me every available man. Pull every resource. Sweep every warehouse Cassano owns or has access to. Every abandoned lot, every dock, every dilapidated building in his territory. I want them to tear the city apart until they find her. And if they so much as scratch her, Cassano will regret the day he was born. My voice was a low, terrifying growl, a promise of unbridled retribution. This wasn't just about Zara. It was about my absolute authority, my reputation, my control. But beneath the cold logic of empire, a frantic, primal terror clawed at me. The image of her terrified, defiant face, the feel of her trembling hand in mine, the ghost of her kiss on my lips. It was a visceral need to retrieve her, to burn anyone who had dared to touch her. Hours later, the city was a beehive of my men, systematically dissecting Cassano's territory. Information trickled in. A black van sighted near an old industrial park on the waterfront, a known drop-off point for Cassano's illicit goods. "That's it," I snarled. "That's where she is." "Marco, mobilize the assault team. Vincenzo, coordinate the perimeter. I want Cassano's entire operation obliterated, and I want Leo brought to me alive. He's going to suffer." The drive to the industrial park was a blur. The adrenaline pumping through my veins was raw, pure vengeance. I bypassed my lead team, racing ahead in my armored sedan, the city lights fading into the grim, shadowy outlines of derelict warehouses. We converged on a specific, isolated warehouse, a skeletal structure of corrugated metal, its windows shattered like empty eyes. My men took positions, moving with silent, brutal efficiency. "Entry point secured." Marco's voice crackled over the comms. "Hostiles inside. We have eyes on Zara." "Move," I commanded, my voice devoid of mercy. The doors exploded inward with a deafening crash. The air was instantly filled with the chaos of gunfire, shouts, and the sickening thud of bodies. I didn't hesitate. I moved like a phantom, my training taking over, every motion precise, lethal. My eyes swept the cavernous, dimly lit interior, bypassing the falling bodies, the desperate resistance of Cassano's men. I found her. She was in the center of the warehouse, tied to a metal chair, her emerald dress torn, her face pale, but her eyes, those defiant green eyes, were still blazing, fixed on a cowering figure in front of her. Leo. He had a knife. He was holding it to her throat, his face a mask of terrified desperation, his bravado utterly shattered by the storm of my arrival. Get back. Get back, Vitale. I'll cut her. I swear to God, he shrieked, his voice cracking. A red haze descended. My entire world narrowed to Leo, the knife, and Zara's terrified face. You touch her, I said, my voice quiet, flat, and colder than any Arctic wind. And you will wish you had died in that restaurant. Drop the knife, Leo. Now. He hesitated, his eyes darting frantically. He was broken. He's not worth it, Leo! Cassano's voice bellowed from the shadows, suddenly appearing, surrounded by two of his last remaining goons, a gun clutched in his hand. Kill her! Finish it! Cassano raised his weapon, aiming not at me, but at Zara, to eliminate the problem. My vision flared. Time slowed. I moved. Before Cassano could pull the trigger, I fired 2 precise shots, one to his hand, shattering his weapon and his grip, the other to his knee, dropping him to the ground in a guttural scream. Simultaneously, I lunged at Leo. He was too slow, too weak. My hand clamped around his wrist, twisting it with brutal force. The knife clattered to the floor as he screamed. I didn't stop there. I smashed his head into the metal chair Zara was tied to, then into the cold concrete floor, a sickening thud. He went limp, unconscious. I didn't look to see if he was breathing. I didn't care. My men finished sweeping the warehouse, securing the remaining hostiles. The fight was over. The silence, when it fell, was thick with the scent of cordite, fear, and blood. I knelt in front of Zara, my heart pounding, my hands shaking, not from the violence, but from the visceral terror of almost losing her. I ripped the zip ties from her wrists, pulling them free. Zara, I breathed, my voice rough. Are you hurt? Tell me you're not hurt. She stared at me, her eyes wide, unblinking. Her wrists were raw, bruised, but her gaze was fixed not on my face, but on the blood spattered on my custom suit, on the unconscious, battered bodies littering the warehouse floor, on Cassano, groaning in pain, his hand a mangled mess, on Leo, lying motionless. She recoiled, not from the fear of Leo, but from me. She pushed herself away, scrambling backward until her back hit the metal legs of the chair. Her breath came in ragged, terrified gasps. Her eyes filled with a horror I had never seen directed at me. Not from a civilian, not from an enemy. Oh my God, she whispered. Her voice choked. Matteo, what have you done? The relief of finding her safe evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp pain. The blood on my hands was a barrier, not a shield. I had saved her, but in doing so I had revealed the absolute monster I was. The gulf between us had never been wider. The cost of my protection was her horror.
Chapter 9. Zara. The drive back to the city was silent, suffocating. I sat in the vast, leather-scented back seat of Matteo's car, Marco driving, Vincenzo in the passenger seat. Matteo sat beside me, his bloody jacket discarded, the white of his shirt pristine but the dark stain of violence still clinging to the air around him. I was safe. The fear of Leo and Cassano was gone, replaced by a cold, absolute terror of the man who had saved me. I didn't see my protector. I saw the executioner. The brutal efficiency of his vengeance was a mirror image of the cruelty I'd tried so hard to escape, just on a terrifyingly grander, more powerful scale. When we finally reached the apartment, I moved like a sleepwalker. I went straight to the spare bedroom, pulled a small suitcase from the closet, and began tossing clothes inside. I didn't care about the silks or the expensive things he had bought. I grabbed only my oldest, most worn items, the ones that felt like me. I had to leave. Now. Matteo found me with the suitcase half-packed, standing over the open zipper, my hands trembling. He stood in the doorway, blocking the exit, his posture rigid. He was still in the suit pants and shirt, every line of his powerful body radiating exhausted fury, but his voice was controlled, lethal. "What the hell are you doing, Zara?" I flinched at the sound of my name, the coldness in his tone. I straightened my spine, turning to face him, forcing myself to look past the dangerous beauty and focus on the blood on his cuffs. "I'm leaving, Matteo." "I told you I wasn't an assassin. I'm not a soldier either. I cannot stay here. I cannot live like this." "Live like what?" he demanded, taking a slow, predatory step into the room. "Like the woman whose life I just pulled out of the fire? Like the woman who is now safe?" "You're safe, Zara. Leo is broken. Cassano is finished. No one will touch you again." "Safe?" I whispered, a desperate, hysterical laugh bubbling up. "Look at you! Look at the bodies you left. You didn't save me, Matteo. You claimed me. You proved that my life is just a piece of territory in your bloody game, and you're willing to use a sledgehammer to defend it." I slammed the suitcase shut, the sound sharp in the silence. I ran from a man who thought he owned me, who used fear and control to keep me exactly where he wanted me. He just used smaller hands and cheaper words. "You are no different, Matteo. You are just richer, and your cage is gold-plated." The accusation hung in the air, a physical weight. I had thrown the one insult that could pierce his armor. I compared him to Leo. His face went utterly still. The fury vanished, replaced by a shock so profound it was almost visible. His eyes, usually granite, flickered with a raw, agonizing vulnerability. "Don't you dare," he said, his voice dropping to a low, ragged rasp that hurt more than any shouting. "Don't you dare compare me to that pathetic insect. I didn't hurt you, Zara. I eliminated a threat. I protected you from the consequences of being too good, too smart, too visible in a world that chews up women like you." "You protected your reputation," I shot back, tears of exhaustion and anger finally streaming down my face. "You wanted your territory untouched. The only difference between you and Leo is that he wanted to control my body, and you want to control my mind and my existence." The moment I saw the blood on your hands, I realized I exchanged one prison for a fortress, and the warden is even more possessive. I took a trembling step toward the door, my hand reaching for the knob, desperate to flee the magnetic pull of his presence. He moved instantly, his hand slamming against the wood beside my head, trapping me against the door. He didn't touch me, but the sheer force of his presence was an overwhelming physical restraint. "You're not going anywhere," he ground out, his breath hot against my ear. "You walk out that door tonight and I can't guarantee anything. Not your safety, not your freedom. You know too much, Zara. You're intertwined now. You stay." My defiance hardened. "You're locking me in?" "I am securing what is mine," he corrected, his voice laced with desperate frustration. "I found you under a table, fighting for your life. I brought you into my sanctuary. I defended you with everything I command, and now you want to walk back into the darkness because you don't like the look of my methods? I don't give a damn about the legitimate world, Zara. It's weak. It's slow. My world is brutal, but it is effective." I looked up at him, into the dark, wounded depths of his eyes. "And that's why I can't stay. Because your methods will consume me. They will turn me into someone who is okay with the bloodshed." The words were true, but they were a dagger. The accusation of being a prison guard was the only thing that could truly hurt him, because he genuinely believed he was offering me a better life, a safer life. He lowered his head, his forehead resting against the door, inches from mine. His breath was ragged. The intensity of his gaze was a physical ache. "I won't let you leave," he finally stated, his voice devoid of threat, filled only with desolate resolve. "Not because you're a liability, but because I need you. I need you to show me the clean path out of the shadows. I need you to be the one voice that keeps me from becoming the monster everyone else expects." It was the closest thing to a full confession of weakness, of love he was capable of. A desperate, quiet plea for absolution and partnership. But the warehouse, the blood, the sheer violence, was too fresh. "I can't be your salvation, Matteo," I whispered, the exhaustion finally winning. "I can only be your partner. And that means I need to choose you, not be forced to stay."
Chapter 10. Matteo. The weight of the world was suddenly heavier than any stack of ledgers or any debt owed. It was the weight of Zara's accusation. "You are just like him." The air felt thin, toxic. I pulled my hand from the door, taking a staggering step back. I had faced assassins, rivals, and the calculating coldness of the financial market, and never once had my control fractured. But her words, laced with genuine terror and exhausted disappointment, splintered my self-image. A prison warden. A prettier, richer cage. The anger I had felt for Cassano, for Leo, was a clean, focused rage. This, however, was a blinding, agonizing burn of being misunderstood by the one person whose understanding I craved. I wasn't Leo. Leo was a pathetic bully who fed on weakness. I protected strength. I sought excellence. But in that moment, seeing the profound horror in her green eyes, I realized my method of protection was indistinguishable from her ex's method of oppression. Control was control. I walked to the window, staring blindly at the city, my empire, the thing I had built with blood and ruthless calculation. It was supposed to be a shield. Now it was just the reason she wanted to run. I stayed silent until the tremors in my hands subsided, until I could trust my voice to be cold, rational, and entirely devoid of the desperation clawing at my chest. "You're right," I finally stated, the concession tasting like rust. "I forced you to stay. I used your fear and my power to keep you here. It was selfish, it was necessary, but it ends tonight. The threats are gone. Cassano's operation is dismantled. Leo is irrelevant. Your life is no longer in immediate danger." I turned, my gaze direct, unblinking. She stood frozen by the door, the packed suitcase a monument to her resolve. "You said you can't be forced to stay. You said you needed to choose to be my partner. I understand that now. I miscalculated. I forgot that I value your mind precisely because it is free, not because it is compliant." I took a deep breath. This was the single biggest gamble of my life. Walking away from control, trusting her completely, with the truth and the future. This is not a cage, Zara. It's a battlefield I'm trying to walk off, and I realize I cannot do it without you. You see the clean way through the mess. You see the legal flaw, the logical fallacy, the weakness in the structure. That is what will save us both. I approached the desk, pulled out a thick, sealed document, and placed it between us. This is a full divestment plan. Every illegal asset, every shell company, every offshore account, it's all structured for disposal, liquidation, and transference into legitimate, traceable holdings. It's the future I've been working toward for 5 years. Slow, agonizing, but secure. I was doing it alone. You accelerated my thinking. You gave me the courage to push harder, faster. I leaned against the desk, my hands planted on the cool granite, the symbol of my power. I give you two choices, Zara. And I swear to you, this is the truth. I will abide by your decision, regardless of the cost to me. My gaze bored into hers, searching for any sign of her softening, of the connection we'd forged returning. Choice 1. Walk away. I will put you on a private jet tomorrow morning. You will go anywhere you choose. Europe, South America, anywhere. I will personally ensure that Cassano and Leo are permanently neutralized, wiped from the map, so they can never find you. I will give you a financial package that guarantees your freedom and your comfort for the rest of your life. You disappear, and I never contact you again. You get your freedom, your peace, and your safety. You will never have to look at blood on my hands again. I guarantee it. I let the magnitude of that offer, the absolute sacrifice of my heart for her peace, sink in. It was the only way I could truly prove I wasn't Leo. Leo would have locked the door and burned the key. I was offering the key and the map to the outside world. Choice 2. Stay. You don't stay as my PA or my captive or my mistress. You stay as my partner. You sit at the head of the table. You take this divestment plan, I tap the document, and you help me execute it. You use your brilliant, critical mind to find the fastest, cleanest, most legal path to turn this entire empire legitimate. I will be the shield, the muscle, the necessary force. You will be the architect, the strategist, the conscience. We share the power, we share the risk, and we share everything else. I pushed off the desk, taking the last step that closed the distance between us. I reached out, my hand lifting to brush a tear from her cheek. This was my final, ultimate vulnerability. I love you, Zara. Not for your compliance, but for your defiance. I love the way your mind works, the way you look at me with disgust and admiration in the same second. I love the person you challenge me to become. If you stay, it is because you choose to build a future with me, acknowledging the darkness that made me, but demanding the light that will save us both. If you choose this path, you will be safe, but you will not be innocent. You will be involved, and I will never, ever be able to let you go. I stepped back, putting the choice, the immense, terrifying, hopeful choice, squarely back into her court. The suitcase, the door, the jet, all were available. All were guaranteed. The decision is yours, Zara. The time for force is over. I need you to choose. Do you walk away from the darkness to find peace? Or do you stay and help me bring the light in? I waited, my heart pounding a relentless drumbeat against my ribs. The fate of my empire, the sanity of my soul, hung on the decision of the woman who had hidden under my table to escape a ghost.
Chapter 11. Zara! The silence was profound, broken only by the frantic hammering of my own heart. I stood by the door, the small, pitifully packed suitcase at my feet, the words, "I love you," echoing in the room, colliding with the memory of the blood-stained warehouse floor. My breath hitched as I looked at Matteo. He was vulnerable now, more exposed than he had been in the darkest alleys, offering me not a demand, but a choice. The key to my freedom, or the key to his entire world. The choice was a terrifying gift. I looked down at the suitcase. Running meant returning to a life of perpetual looking over my shoulder, a life where my sharp mind was wasted on bureaucratic reports. It meant choosing to be perpetually small. I looked at the thick divestment plan on his desk. Staying meant embracing the danger, embracing the complexity, and and embracing the man who stood before me. A man who, beneath the ruthless exterior, was desperate to build something clean, something lasting, something worthy of the high stakes he demanded. I took a slow, deliberate breath, steadying my trembling hands. I walked away from the door, away from the suitcase, and toward the desk. I picked up the heavy, leather-bound document. Choice 2. "You will not neutralize them," I stated, my voice clear and firm, echoing the authority he had challenged me to claim. "Leo and Cassano. They will not die on your command. They will be dismantled legally and financially using this plan. They will be ruined by the very system they believe is too slow and too weak to touch them. That is the only way to prove this choice is real." Matteo didn't move. He simply watched, his dark eyes radiating a tense, breathtaking hope. "And you are right," I continued, meeting his gaze. "I am not just your PA, and I won't be your mistress. I will be your partner. The decisions stop being solely yours. We build the light together, or we don't build it at all." A slow, genuine smile, the first one I'd ever seen that reached his eyes, finally broke through his cold facade. It was devastating. "Welcome to the firm, partner," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion and victory. The next few weeks were a relentless, exhilarating war fought with spreadsheets and legal statutes instead of guns. We worked side by side in that stark office, fueled by black coffee and the electric tension that vibrated between us. I was no longer just analyzing, I was directing. I used my expertise to create the clean sweep strategy, a series of brilliant, perfectly legal maneuvers that leveraged the divestment plan against Cassano's own illicit holdings. We didn't need to touch him physically. We just needed to prove to his banks, his partners, and his legal team that his assets were fatally compromised by his reliance on illegal funds and shell companies. I found the weakness. Cassano, blinded by arrogance, had foolishly accepted a major investment from one of Matteo's targeted shell companies, a company that was now being legally and publicly liquidated. The takedown, we timed the execution perfectly. Matteo, clean-shaven and impeccably suited, appeared at the main office of Cassano's holding company, not with armed men, but with a team of forensic accountants and federal agents, quietly guided by my legal maneuvering. They presented irrefutable evidence that Cassano was running a fraudulent enterprise. The climax wasn't a hail of bullets. It was the sharp, definitive click of handcuffs. Cassano was done, destroyed by the very legitimate system he despised. And Leo? He was exposed as a desperate pawn who had crossed state lines in a failed kidnapping attempt. He was handled by the FBI, his fate sealed by his own stupidity and the strength of Matteo's legal defense of me. One evening, months later, I walked into Matteo's apartment. He was not in the office, but in the spacious, sun-drenched living room. He stood by the chess table, the one I had knocked over the night of the kidnapping. It was pristine, the pieces perfectly positioned. He was holding the white king. "I never touched it," he said, turning to face me. "Not since that night." It was my reminder, my warning. "Of what?" I asked, walking toward him. "That the most valuable piece on the board is the one that forces the opponent to change the game. That the strongest move is often the one that retreats to safety. And that the only true king is the one who accepts partnership." He placed the king back on its square. He held out his hand to me. "I finished the last of the transfers today. Every asset is clean, Zara. The empire is legitimate. The saint is retired. We are now a fully functional, legal, multi-billion-dollar holding group, Vitale and partner." I took his hand. It was strong, warm, and no longer stained by blood, but by ink and purpose. "The name is simple," I said, a slow, deep happiness finally settling in my soul. "I love it." I have one last piece of business, he murmured, his eyes locking onto mine, the intense possessive heat of the night we first kissed burning fiercely between us. He didn't ask a question. He made a statement. You are no longer hiding under my table, partner. It's time you sat at the head of it permanently. He didn't produce a ring. He produced a simple, heavy key. The key to the apartment, the fortress I was once confined to, now our home. I offer you this. Complete freedom, absolute security, and my absolute unwavering devotion. No more control, only choice. Choose me, Zara. Choose us. I slid my arms around his neck, pulling him close, the perfect tailored suit feeling like home. I already chose you, Matteo, I whispered, resting my forehead against his. I chose the man who would tear down his own fortress to build a life with me. And in the silence of our shared, legitimate empire, he kissed me. It wasn't the desperate, violent claim of the past. It was a promise. Passionate, tender, and forever. We had won the game. Not by surviving the darkness, but by bringing the light.